Welcome back to this collection of special memories from the good old days. Most of us, when we think of our mothers, remember their hands. Sometimes soft and gentle, sometimes hard as nails, they were always busy and industrious. Adeline Roseberg shares precious memories of her own mother in Mama's hands.
Whenever I think of Mama, I remember her hands. You'd expect a pioneer mother of 7 daughters and 4 sons who worked hard under trying conditions would have rough red hands, but not Mama. Mama's hands were beautiful, narrow hands with slender fingers, with soft skin, even though she used no creams or lotions. Not delicate hands, but beautiful. And not only beautiful to look at, but supple, quick hands that were never idle. I remember how she used to comb her long brown hair, bending at the waist as she combed downward, her hair almost touching the floor. Then she would raise up, and her hands would deftly twist all that hair into a neat pug on top of her head, sticking in a big bone hairpin here and there to keep it in place. We never tired of watching her do this, and you may be sure we saw it many and many a time as she wore her hair in this same style all through the years. Another vivid memory I have of her hands from way back is how handily and gently she diapered a baby on her lap. There was always a new baby to care for. She'd hang on to baby with one hand, and with the other spread a flannel triangle under the little bottom and dust it with talcum powder, and then somehow got those 3 safety pins in just right. That, too, was always fascinating to watch. And how lovingly and tenderly Mama's hands could wipe away our childish tears when we were hurt, or give us an encouraging pat on the back if we did well on some job she gave us to do. There were so many of us, but she found time for each one. I remember our Saturday night baths. She'd dip warm water out of the reservoir into a wash tub on the kitchen floor by the wood stove. How many little bodies Mama's hands had to help bathe before she could finally have her bath, after we were clean and tucked into bed. And I remember getting ready for Sunday school on Sunday mornings, dressing around the heater in the dining room. Mama's hands were really flying then, finding clean clothes for each one, tying shoelaces, buttoning dresses, and combing hair. I can see her strong hands rubbing clothes on the old washboard in the kitchen during the winter, under a shade tree in summer. As we got bigger, we all had our turns at the washboard, but there were many years when she did it alone. And how beautifully and capably her hands would iron the clothes with the old flat irons heated on the wood stove. Her hands could wield a scrub brush, too, on a board floor. I especially remember that in the old summer kitchen. In summers, we cooked and ate in a separate little building to keep the big house from getting too hot and dirty with the fire going for summer cooking and canning. On her hands and knees she would scrub one little square at a time, rubbing the brush occasionally on a big bar of soap, then scrubbing with vigor and taking pride in each clean patch. Mama's hands did a wonderful job in the garden, planting and weeding and hoeing, picking, cooking, and canning, so that many hungry mouths could be fed. Picking wild berries was her delight, especially blueberries. Her lively fingers could fill a bucket much quicker than those of any of the rest of us. We never could get as enthusiastic about picking as she did, but we were more than willing to eat that delicious blueberry sauce that she canned, so extra good on waffles on a wintry day. And what a job it was to make enough waffles to feed our hungry crew. The waffle iron was round and black and fit over the fire of the kitchen stove when a lid was removed. The heat had to be just right, and when the waffle was done on one side, the round part that held the batter had to be flopped over so that it would get done on the other side. And Mama's hands could do that just so. Mama often fried pancakes for us for breakfast on a long griddle that held 8 pancakes at a time. Her hands were busy turning pancakes and frying side pork to go with them. And her hands did a great job kneading her famous rye bread in the big dishpan. We were happy when she would roll out a flatbread, poke holes in it with a fork after it had raised a bit, and bake that first, and we'd eat it hot out of the oven. Her hands were handy, too, at cutting out and baking big molasses cookies that tasted so good to us with glasses of cold milk. I can see Mama with a coffee cup in her hands, A pause for a cup of coffee was her greatest luxury, and how she relished that first cup of coffee in the morning that Papa brought for her to drink before she got out of bed. A cup of coffee helped to celebrate happy events, cheered one when sad or troubled, helped relax one when tired. A cup of coffee in Mama's hands could serve many purposes. And how quick she was to serve coffee to others, as when Papa brought customers in from his general store to share a cup of coffee and a bite to eat. Her nimble fingers had some food on the table in no time and had poured up hot cups of the ever-ready coffee. Visiting ministers always stayed at our house. Here, too, her hands were quick to serve, giving to each one the best we had, the best sheets, the best towels, the best food. Her capable hands could milk cows, too, and feed calves and rake the lawn, or whatever had to be done. Even when Mama sat down to rest, her hands were forever busy. Knitting was her relaxation, mittens and stockings to keep us warm, and a bit of crocheting and embroidering now and then to have some pretty things around. There were always overalls to patch, sometimes by lamplight, even far into the night if they were needed next day. In spare time, she braided or crocheted rugs for the floors, and when we girls were little, she sewed dresses for us on the old treadle sewing machine. It was important for us all to have new dresses for such special occasions as the Sunday school and country school Christmas programs. The leftover scraps she used for patchwork quilts. Nothing was ever wasted. I especially remember the velvet quilt she made with such painstaking care. One of Mama's sisters had a hat store in town and gave Mama boxes of beautiful velvet scraps, rich and colorful, from which she made a crazy quilt of pieces of all sizes and colors. Around each piece, she made fancy stitching with embroidery thread and contrasting colors to set off each piece. This particular bit of handiwork was greatly admired by friends and neighbors. Not everybody had a velvet quilt. Mama put it on the old sofa in the living room just for special occasions. To us, that velvet quilt was the height of elegance. And Mama's hands had green thumbs. Her houseplants always thrived. How carefully and faithfully she watered and tended them, and what joy they brought to her and to everybody during the long cold winters. But above all else, Mama's hands were praying hands. So is it any wonder that when I think of Mama, I especially remember her hands?
One thing our mothers always did was make sure we were healthy back in the good old days. With almost no medical help, they kept us going, in more ways than one. Ruth Outwater remembers her mother's herbal cures and wonders if the illness might have been easier to stomach. She remembers how Mama cleaned us out.
Mama considered food to be the panacea for all ills of the human spirit. When Buddy or I were bored, unhappy, quarrelsome, or just not feeling up to snuff, she'd say, "You're probably hungry. You'll feel better if you have something to eat." And sure enough, a slice of bread and butter and sugar, or a glass of milk with a couple of Dutch boy cookies, would bring marked improvement. Dutch boy cookies were round, flat sugar cookies that had a hole in the middle and scallops around the edge. The only acceptable way to eat them, of course, was to stick your finger through the hole and nibble around the edge until there was nothing left but a ring on your finger. More drastic measures were called for in the case of physical ailments. Every time one of us had a cold, the whole house reeked of camphorated oil and or mustard plasters. Mama swore by these time-tested remedies, and the only reason Buddy and I didn't swear at them was because we didn't know any swear words and wouldn't have been allowed to use them anyway. We had other ways of making our feelings known. Seeing Mama coming with a saucer of warm oil and a flannel cloth, the invalid would pull the bedclothes over his or her head and scream hoarsely, "Take it away! It stinks!" Now that isn't a nice word, Mama would admonish, pulling back the covers. Besides, this doesn't smell bad at all. Do you know what Grandma did when I was a little girl? She made me wear an asafoetida bag around my neck. That really smelled. We objected just as strongly to the application of mustard plasters. Even before the cold, clammy thing had begun to warm up, we'd be yelling in agony, "Take it off, quick, it's burning!" And poor Mama, just to make sure, would lift one corner of the plaster and say, "Why, your skin isn't even pink yet. Do you know what Grandma did when I was a little girl and had tonsillitis?" These questions of Mama's were purely rhetorical. She expected no answer from us, but always provided her own. She tied strips of raw bacon fat around my neck. That was a lot worse than mustard plasters. The only thing that made life bearable when we had colds was the flaxseed tea Mama made with honey and lemon juice and gave us for our coughs. This was perfectly delicious, much better than candy, and it was surprising sometimes how long our coughs hung on. A man from the health department was always coming to our house and tacking a quarantine sign to the front door. It wasn't that we went in for a variety of diseases. We kept getting the same ones over and over. We had red measles, German measles, 3-day measles, and chickenpox twice. I was the one who brought these germs into the house, and it wasn't until I had been pronounced cured and fit to be turned loose on society once more that Buddy would break out, and back came the man from the health department. Mama worried about the effect measles might have on our eyes, and when that disease was present, she protected us from the light by pulling down and pinning newspaper to the lace curtains as an added precaution. In the evenings, the dangling electric bulbs wore little newspaper bags. During the long, itchy nights of chickenpox, Mama always was there when we called, her hand cool on our burning foreheads, rubbing zinc ointment on our spots. As I was considered a sickly child, I was always being dosed with something or other. Mama would start out hopefully by trying to make a game of it. "Open your mouth and close your eyes. I'll give you something to make you wise," she'd say, then pop a spoonful of some vile-tasting brew into my wide-open mouth. But even a dullard like me could not be fooled indefinitely by this approach. Mama soon learned to give liquid medication in the kitchen whenever possible, as it was easier to wipe up spots from the linoleum than to wash sheets and blankets. These occasions would find me hopping from one foot to the other and Mama standing in front of me with a spoonful of medicine and a glass of water. "I can't take it," I'd cry, making retching sounds. "It's nasty." "You haven't even tasted it yet," she would say, a note of exasperation in her voice. "Do you know what Grandma made me take when I was a little girl? Sulfur and molasses. I would never give you anything that tasted that bad." After a while, I'd manage to squeeze my eyes shut, hold my nose, and open my mouth as wide as it would go. But just as Mama would get the spoon to my lips, I'd jerk back convulsively, sending the spoon and its contents flying across the room. When it came to patience, Mama could have taught Job a thing or two. Our neighbor, Mrs. Fraser, being the wife of a doctor, felt herself qualified to make what she called iron pills. She gave a supply of them to Mama, assuring her that they were just the thing for what ailed me. These pills, about the size of large marbles, were of a gelatin consistency, soft to the touch, greenish black in color, and stank to high heaven. As Mrs. Fraser hadn't yet mastered the art of sugarcoating her wares, the pills were absolutely impossible to swallow without their sticking midway down my throat. I made such a fuss and holler, much worse than my usual performance, that one day Mama, in desperation, said, "Here, I'll take one and show you how easy it is." After that, I never had to take another iron pill. Buddy did not have all this trouble swallowing medicine. The thing that would send him running through the house looking for a hiding place was what he and Mama referred to as the enemy. But even when we were feeling fine, Mama might look at us thoughtfully and decide that what we needed was a good cleaning out. The most potent agency ever devised for this purpose was calomel. The small white tablets looked innocent enough, but they contained all the force of atomic energy. We were given 2 tablets at 3 or 4 hour intervals during the day, the last dose topped off with a brimming glass of citrate of magnesia. By then we were too sick to hold our heads up. The cleaning out that followed shortly thereafter was so complete and utterly overwhelming that by comparison, camphorated oil and mustard plasters were fun.
We learned so much from our mothers, whether it was something as spiritual as Bible lessons or as temporal as how to handle a school bully. They were always there to lend a helping hand. Jessie Barrett remembers one lesson that didn't go exactly as Mama intended. Go back with Jessie and see how Mother taught us to swim.
In 1920, when I was about 5 years old, we lived in a small town about 2 blocks from a river. When school was out, my 3 brothers would start asking my mother, "When are we going to go swimming?" "As soon as I can buy some suits for you boys and have some made for your sister and me." The next day she went into the city and came home with some suits for the boys and some material for herself and me. The dressmaker came about 8 o'clock in the morning and by evening had completed the suits, if one could call them suits. They had yards and yards in them, gathered at the neck and reached our ankles. My mother's had at least 8 yards in it, for my mother was quite a large woman. I heard the dressmaker saying something about she had never seen any bathing suits like those she was making. My mother said, "I don't suppose you have. These are my own idea. I wouldn't think of wearing those skimpy things they sell in the stores. A woman with modesty wouldn't." The next day, about 2 o'clock, we started to get ready to go to the river. There was an old baby carriage in the basement. It was brought up and cleaned. In it went a well-filled lunch basket, as we would be hungry after our swim, a dozen or more large bath towels, a bag of clothespins, a coil of rope 20 or 30 feet long, and my mother's and my new bathing suits. My mother had bought the boys' store-bought suits, as she called them. As I remember them, they were made of some kind of knitted material with stripes running crosswise. They were bought with the thought of the boys growing and were sizes larger than usual. My mother used safety pins and took them up on the shoulders. The only thing she could do with the legs was just let them hang. They came down far below their knees. The boys just stood and looked at each other and then went into howls of laughter. A threat that they better be quiet or they could and would have to stay home shut them up in a hurry. We made quite a parade going down the sidewalk. First, one of the older boys had the beach umbrella and a camp chair. Then came the carriage. When we arrived at the grassy spot that was selected, the boys pushed the end of the umbrella down into the soft ground. Then my mother took some of the largest towels and pinned them to the umbrella, making a very good dressing tent. First she had me come in and undress down to my underwear. Then she slipped on my suit. I was too young to know what most people wore, but the few times I had seen people in swimming, they hadn't worn anything like mine. My mother told me to wait outside while she got ready. When she took off her corsets, she pinned them to the edge of the umbrella, except for her bloomers. These she kept on. When she was ready, she called to the boys, saying, "I'm going to wade out into the river near the log that had fallen on the bank. I'll tie one end of the rope to the one I am going to teach, and the other end to the log. You 2 oldest boys know how to swim, so you can go on in, but don't go out far, as there's quite a swift current out a little way." My mother was a wonderful and powerful swimmer, and she and my father had taught the 2 oldest brothers to swim as soon as they were old enough. Mother took my little brother out with her and tied the rope to the log and one end to him. Then taking off her slippers, she waded into the river. She was just starting to show him how to reach out with his arms and kick with his feet and legs when the water got inside her bathing suit and pushed the material up and out until it enveloped her. She tried to pull it down and away, but the more she struggled, the larger it got. The boys tried to help her, but they got tangled up in the rope. I couldn't see my precious mother at all, so I started screaming and yelling. 2 men were in a boat across the river, and hearing all the screaming and yelling, thought that someone was drowning, so they rowed as fast as they could. As they came close, I heard one man say to the other, "Looks like a balloon." My mother had finally succeeded in getting control of her outfit just as one man was pulling their boat up onto the bank. They called to her and asked, "Are you in trouble, missus? Can we help?" "No, thank you. There's nothing wrong," my mother answered with all the dignity she had. "Well, all right," one of the men answered. "We thought you might be in some kind of trouble." As they started to row away, one of them said to the other, "What in the world was that thing she had around her? Looked like a tent to me." "Sure did." Then they both laughed. Mother waited until they were back across the river before she emerged from the river. Nothing could have persuaded her to let anyone see her, as the water had soaked through the garment and it stuck to her body, outlining it more than anyone would have thought possible. She had me bring her some of the largest towels, which she wound around herself until she could get back to the dressing tent. So you can see, my mother was modest.
There were some grown-up lessons that were hard for a little girl to understand. One of those remained hidden for years until Marie Stratman discovered her mother's bandbox.
I remember the day that I discovered my mother's beautiful bandbox. I was an inquisitive 7-year-old, and that day my curiosity took me to Mother's bedroom closet. Above the rack of clothes was a shelf holding several interesting boxes. I mounted a stool and stood balanced on tiptoes to see. Far back at one end of the shelf was a large, round, pink and blue striped box with a big pink bow on top. I quivered with excitement as I stretched and reached for it. After several attempts, I had to give up. I jumped down and ran to the kitchen where Mother was punching down bread dough. "Mama, did you know there's a pretty pink box on the shelf in your closet?" She wiped the flour from her hands and smiled. "Yes, I know. It's my bandbox. How did you find it?" "I just happened to notice it. What's a bandbox, Mama? It's so pretty. Can I see it?" She patted my head. "Some day, when you're a little older, I will take the bandbox down and show you what's inside." "Some day is a long time to wait," I pouted. "You'll forget." "I doubt that you'll let me forget, honey." I certainly didn't let her forget. I couldn't keep my mind off that bandbox. I asked frequently, "Is this the day I get to see the bandbox, Mama?" One rainy afternoon, Mother took me into her bedroom. I sat wide-eyed in the middle of the bed. Mother's fingers trembled slightly as she placed the bandbox beside me and carefully untied the pink satin bow and lifted the lid from the box. She pushed back the faded tissue paper and took out a beautiful white lace hat, trimmed with delicate rosebuds and pink silk ribbon. I sucked in my breath and whispered, "Whose hat is that?" "It's my hat, dear," she said, laughing as she put it on her head. She looked at herself in the dresser mirror. She became very quiet, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes. She pulled off the hat and tossed it onto my lap. Then my questions poured out. "Where did you get such a pretty hat? Why don't you wear it? Don't you like the hat, Mama?" She sat beside me and held the hat, touching the rosebuds gently. "It's still a beautiful hat," she murmured, as she smoothed the wrinkle from the silk ribbon. "After all these years, it's still beautiful, but the bandbox has a few scars." "Mama, where did it come from?" I asked quietly. Her hand reached out and tilted back my head. "Do you want to hear the story of my beautiful hat and bandbox?" I nodded. "Please tell me." "I might as well tell you, my daughter, or you will be asking questions forever." She sighed deeply and began. "Once upon a time, I was a young girl, 17 years old and living in St. Louis with my family. I was the oldest daughter, and my papa allowed me to work in a millinery shop." "What's a millinery shop?" I interrupted. "A store that makes and sells hats. The owner of the shop made fancy hats for the rich ladies in St. Louis. She taught me to make pretty hats of satin, velvets, straw, and lace, with lovely feathers, flowers, and ribbons on them." I touched the white hat. "Mama, did you make this one?" "Yes, honey, I made this hat for a very special occasion," she said softly. "What special occasion?" She walked to the window and looked out at the rain for several seconds. "What occasion, Mama?" I asked again. She came back to the bed and picked up the hat. The occasion was to have been my wedding day. I jumped off the bed and faced her. "Were you going to wear this hat when you married Daddy?" "No, dear, this was a long time before I knew your Daddy. There was a young man in St. Louis who asked me to marry him. I made this hat to wear with a white dress trimmed with tiny tucks and rows of lace, but I never wore it. This hat has been in this bandbox for almost 20 years. "What happened, Mama?" We sat on the bed again, and she brushed the hair from my face before she answered. "So many things happened so fast that spring." She closed her eyes as if to remember. "First, my mother died suddenly from pneumonia, and since I was the oldest daughter, I had to take care of my little brothers and sisters. My father was sad and restless after he lost his wife. One day he came home and announced that he had sold our home and that we were moving to Kansas to start all over again." Was Kansas a long way off from St. Louis? I was caught up emotionally in her story. "It seemed a long way on that noisy, dusty train. I'll never forget that trip. It was so hot, and we bounced in our seats. We were all frightened, leaving our home in the city and traveling over the plains of Kansas to a small settlement. I begged Pa to let me stay in St. Louis and marry my young man, but Papa said no. You see, I had to take my mother's place and cook and care for the younger children. "Did you cry when you left your young man?" I asked tearfully. "Yes, we both cried, but he promised to come to Kansas soon and take me back with him. He told me to take care of my wedding hat until he came. I kept it in the bandbox and waited for several years, but he never came." "Why, Mama? Why didn't he come?" "Too many things happened. We finally lost track of each other. I never saw him again. Besides, I was so busy taking care of our family. Papa and the others needed me. Those were hard times. Somehow this hat didn't belong in that shabby little Kansas town. I never wore it, but I did take it from the bandbox many times when I was lonely, remembering the happy times in St. Louis and wondering what happened to my young man." "Mama, were you sad all the time?" She put the bandbox back on the shelf and turned to me, smiling. "Was I sad?" "Yes, but only until a handsome Englishman took me to a barn dance one Saturday night. My goodness, could that man dance!" "Was that handsome man our daddy?" I asked quickly. She gave me a big hug. "Yes, honey. I never had time for bandboxes after I met your daddy." Mother's bandbox stayed hidden on the closet shelf for years and years, a gentle reminder of her lost youth and her lost love. One day I discovered that it was gone. "Hey, Mom, what happened to your old bandbox?" I asked teasingly. She looked me squarely in the eyes. "That silly old bandbox? I haven't needed it for years. I finally outgrew it, dear." We smiled at each other. At last, I understood.